First story, the Matthew Klein case, The Light in Boston Cemetery, 1998. I don't know why I'm writing this, maybe to get it out of my head, maybe to see if anyone else has been through something like this. Either way, I need to put it somewhere. Because the more I try to forget, the clearer it gets. This happened in 1998, but I still wake up in the middle of the night feeling like I'm floating, like I'm back there. I was working security at Mount Hope Cemetery in Boston. It wasn't exactly a dream job, but it paid the bills, and honestly I liked the quiet. At night, the place was eerie but peaceful, at least until that night. That night, everything changed. It was late, maybe around 2 a.m. when I saw it. A dim blue glow coming from one of the newer graves. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But as I got closer, the light didn't flicker or fade. It just hovered, like it was waiting for me to notice it. I should have turned around right then. Every instinct in me was screaming that something wasn't right. But I was alone, and curiosity is a bastard. So I kept walking. As I stepped closer, I noticed something strange. My radio crackled with static. Then my flashlight flickered and died. The grave in front of me wasn't fully settled yet, the dirt still fresh from a recent burial. And that blue light? It wasn't coming from above. It was rising out of the earth. A cold wave passed over me and my whole body locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, just stood there like a goddamn statue. Then, before I could even process what was happening, I felt it. A pull. Not like wind, not like gravity, but something else entirely. I wasn't being lifted. I was being taken. My feet left the ground, and my stomach flipped like I'd been yanked into the sky. The air around me felt thick, almost gel-like, pressing against my skin. I couldn't breathe, couldn't even think properly. The next thing, I knew I was inside, somewhere metallic, smooth and cold. A dim white glow lit up the curved walls, and I felt weightless, like I was floating in the middle of the room. That's when I saw them. Small figures with long, thin limbs and skin like wet concrete. Their eyes, huge, black and empty, locked onto me like I was an insect under a magnifying glass. They didn't speak, didn't move at first. They just watched. Then, all at once, they stepped forward. I tried to scream, but my throat didn't work, my limbs didn't work. I was locked inside my own body, like a spectator watching something horrible unfold in front of me. The air had a strange, sterile smell, like metal and something faintly burnt. The room itself wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. There were no seams, no corners, just smooth, curved walls that almost seemed to breathe. The creatures moved, in unison, their long fingers twitching slightly as they circled me. I wanted to close my eyes, but I couldn't. Every muscle in my body was useless except for my mind. My mind was screaming. One of them raised a thin, almost skeletal hand and touched my forehead. The second its fingers made contact, a sensation flooded through me, something I can only describe as being unraveled. My thoughts, my memories, my entire sense of self. It all started peeling away, layer by layer. It wasn't like they were reading my mind. It was like they were reaching in and grabbing things. Images of my childhood, my mother's face, the first time I got behind the wheel of a car. It all rushed through me at once, like someone flipping through an old photo album at an impossible speed. The worst part, I felt nothing. No sadness, no fear, just an empty, detached awareness that I was being taken apart thought by thought. At some point, I don't know when, I blacked out. When I came to, I was strapped down, lying on what felt like a metal slab, though I couldn't see anything holding me in place. The beings were still there, their massive, unblinking eyes scanning me with that same detached interest. My body felt different, lighter, hollowed out, like something inside me had been scooped away. I became aware of a dull, rhythmic hum pulsing through the air, vibrating deep in my bones. I turned my head, or maybe they let me turn my head, and saw something floating beside me. It was a machine, but not like anything I'd ever seen before. No buttons, no wires, just a shifting, pulsing shape of dark metal that almost seemed to be alive. It moved without making a sound, hovering inches above my body. Then, slowly, it lowered toward my chest. The second it touched me, pain exploded through my entire body, not sharp, not like a knife or a burn, but something deeper, like every cell in my body was being stretched, pulled apart on a microscopic level. My vision went white. My ears rang with a high-pitched frequency that drilled straight into my skull. I don't remember if I screamed. I don't even know if I could scream. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it was over. No transition, no slow fade, just nothing. I woke up on the ground, lying next to the grave where I'd first seen the light. My body was ice cold, my clothes were ripped, and my mouth was filled with the metallic taste of blood. I felt like I'd been dropped from a height, my bones aching in a way that didn't feel natural. I reached for my radio, dead. My flashlight, cracked. My watch, frozen at 2:17 a.m. I looked around, half expecting to see the blue light still lingering in the air. But there was nothing. Just the quiet, heavy darkness of the cemetery. But the silence wasn't normal. There were no crickets, no wind, no distant hum of the city. Just a thick, absolute emptiness. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking beneath me, and that's when I saw them. The marks. Small, circular imprints burned into the skin of my arms, like something had pressed down hard enough to brand me. My head was pounding, my thoughts scattered like broken glass. I wanted to believe it had been a dream, some kind of hallucination. But as I stumbled back toward my car, one last thing made my stomach drop. Every single light in the cemetery, all the street lamps, the security lights, even the headlights of my truck were dead. But as I reached for my keys with trembling fingers, the entire cemetery lit up at once, flooding the night with an eerie, flickering glow. It was like something had just let go. I don't remember driving home. I know I must have. I woke up in my bed the next morning, still in my torn uniform, my boots caked in dried mud. But I have no memory of getting into my truck. No memory of the drive through the empty Boston streets. No memory of unlocking my front door. It was like my brain had shut off the moment I left that cemetery and only rebooted once I was safe. But I didn't feel safe. Not even close. The first thing I noticed when I sat up was the smell. A faint, burnt metal scent clinging to my skin, to my sheets, even to the air itself. It made my stomach turn, though I had no idea why. The second thing I noticed was the time, 3:40 p.m. I had slept for almost 13 hours. That never happened. No matter how exhausted I was, my body was wired to wake up early. But now it was like I had been drained. I was sluggish, heavy, like I had cement in my veins instead of blood. My arms ached, my head throbbed, and when I finally dragged myself to the bathroom, I froze. The marks on my arms, the perfect circular imprints, were still there. Not bruises, not scratches, something else. I touched them, half expecting them to hurt, but they didn't. They just sat there, slightly raised, slightly warm, like they were pulsing. My stomach twisted. I wanted to believe they were some kind of rash, some reaction to whatever the hell had happened the night before. But deep down, I already knew the truth. They weren't from here. I should have gone to the hospital, should have called someone, but how the hell do you explain something like that? Hey, I think I got abducted last night. Mind running some tests? No one would believe me. Hell, I wouldn't believe me. So instead, I did what any rational person would do. I ignored it. Took a long shower, scrubbed my skin raw, tried to convince myself it was all some fucked up nightmare. But when I got out and checked the mirror, the marks were still there. Worse, the longer I stared at them, the more wrong they looked. The circles weren't random. They were too perfect, too precise. Like they had been placed there deliberately. I felt sick. My hands were shaking as I got dressed, my thoughts racing in 100 different directions. I needed to get out, get some air, do something normal. So I did the one thing I knew best. I went back to work. Stupid, I know. But I needed to see it again. Needed to prove to myself that the graveyard was just a graveyard. That I hadn't actually been taken. That it was all in my head. The second I pulled into the cemetery, I knew I had fucked up. The air felt off, heavy in a way I couldn't explain. My stomach clenched as I parked my truck, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The place was empty, just like always. But for the first time since I started working there, it didn't feel peaceful. It felt watched. I forced myself to step out, my boots crunching against the gravel as I made my way toward the grave where it all happened. It looked the same. Just a patch of disturbed dirt. Nothing unusual. No sign of the light. No sign of them. But the second I got close, a cold wave ran through me, the exact same feeling I had the night before. Like something was there, just beneath the surface, waiting. My breath hitched, my skin prickled, and then, without warning, my radio crackled to life, loud, sharp, bursting through the silence. But it wasn't static this time. It was a voice. Low, garbled, almost mechanical. And though I couldn't understand the words, I knew one thing for sure. It was speaking to me. I don't remember grabbing my radio. I don't even remember lifting it to my ear, but suddenly it was in my hand, pressed so tight against my head that I could hear my own pulse thudding through my skull. The voice wasn't English. It wasn't any language I recognized. It was something else, a mix of distorted clicks, hums, and sounds that almost seemed too precise to be random. And yet somewhere deep in my brain I understood. Not the words themselves, but the intent behind them. It wasn't a message, it was a command. I could feel it crawling under my skin, twisting through my thoughts like fingers digging into wet clay. My vision blurred. My chest tightened. Then, as suddenly as it started, the radio cut out with a sharp pop, leaving nothing but a ringing in my ears. I stood there, frozen, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. My first instinct was to run, get in my truck, leave, never look back. But my legs wouldn't move. It was like I was locked in place, the same way I had been the night before. And then, just as I started to regain control, something shifted in the dirt in front of me. A ripple. A movement. Like something was underneath. I took a step back, my entire body screaming at me to go, but I couldn't look away. The ground trembled, subtle, almost imperceptible, but I felt it. The same way you feel a deep bass vibration in your chest. And then from the disturbed earth, a sliver of blue light seeped through the cracks. My breath hitched. The same goddamn light. I don't know what I was expecting, a hand reaching up, a face breaking through the dirt. But nothing came. Just that eerie glow, pulsing like a heartbeat watching me. The moment I stepped back, the light dimmed. Not like it was fading, but like it was withdrawing, retreating, as if it knew I was scared, as if it liked it. My stomach lurched, and suddenly I couldn't stand being there for another second. I turned on my heel and ran. My boots slipped against the loose dirt, my breath coming out in ragged gasps as I sprinted back to my truck. My hands were shaking, so bad I almost dropped my keys. By the time I finally got the engine to turn over, my entire body was damp with sweat. But just as I threw it into drive, I made one last mistake. I looked up. There, standing at the edge of the cemetery, just beyond the reach of the streetlights, was a figure. Not like the ones I saw in the ship. This one was taller, thinner, more human, but not quite right. Its limbs were too long, its posture too stiff, and even though I couldn't make out any features, I knew it was staring at me. My foot slammed against the gas, tires screeching as I tore out of there so fast I almost lost control. The second I hit the main road, the air around me seemed to clear, like I had broken through some invisible barrier. My lungs expanded fully for the first time since I arrived. The radio, silent since the distortion, suddenly crackled back to life, with the familiar voice of my co-worker checking in for his shift. Everything was normal again, but I knew it wasn't over. The marks on my arms still burned, the taste of metal still clung to my tongue, and worst of all, when I glanced at my rear-view mirror, the cemetery lights were flickering again, like something was laughing. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat on my couch, lights on, TV muted, my hands gripping the arms of the chair so tight my fingers went numb. Every sound outside made my pulse spike, every passing car, every creak of the old pipes in my apartment. I felt watched, not just in the paranoid, irrational way you do after a bad nightmare. This was real. The feeling wasn't in my head. It was on me, wrapped around me like an invisible chain, tugging at the back of my mind. At some point, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, just to have something solid, something real to hold on to. But deep down, I knew. Whatever had done this to me, whatever had taken me, a fucking knife wouldn't make a difference. When the ISO sun finally started to rise, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. I convinced myself I was safe, that the thing I saw at the cemetery was just a shadow, a trick of the light, that the voice on the radio was static, that the marks on my arms would fade, and so would the memory, that I could just move on. And for a few days I almost believed it. Almost. Then the dreams started. Not like normal nightmares. These weren't fragments of fear stitched together by my subconscious. These were memories, but not mine. The first time it happened, I was floating again, the same metallic room, the same humming vibration pressing into my skull. But this time, I wasn't on the table. I was watching from above. I saw myself lying, there, eyes wide, body frozen. I saw the things moving around me, their hands skimming over my skin, their fingers pressing into the soft flesh of my temples. And I saw what they took. It wasn't just my memories. It was something else, something deeper. I watched as they peeled pieces of me away, delicate, careful, like a surgeon extracting an organ. But instead of blood, there was light. A dull, flickering glow seeping from my skin, twisting and writhing in their hands like something alive. They studied it, prodded it, exchanged glances with those cold, black eyes. Then, just as suddenly as it started, they put it back. Not all of it. Just enough to keep me functioning, to keep me here. I woke up gasping, my entire body drenched in sweat. But the worst part, my arms were burning. When I flipped on the light and looked down, the marks were darker, like they had been refreshed. I quit my job the next day. Didn't explain. Didn't give a 2-week notice, just left. I packed a bag, threw it in my truck, and drove. No destination, no plan, just away. I spent weeks bouncing from town to town, sleeping in shitty motels, trying to outrun something I couldn't even name. But no matter where I went, the feeling followed. The dreams got worse. Sometimes I'd wake up in places I didn't remember driving to. Sometimes I'd lose hours without realizing it. One night, I woke up in my truck on the side of a deserted highway, the radio playing nothing but that same garbled voice from before. The clock on my dashboard blinked 2:17 a.m. Always 2:17 a.m. I slammed my fist against the radio, yanked the wires out, did everything I could to make it stop. But it didn't matter. I knew it wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from them. I don't know what they did to me that night in the cemetery. I don't know what they took, but I know this. Whatever it was, they weren't finished. And one day, when I least expect it, when I finally start to feel safe again, they'll come back for the rest. It's been years now. I don't talk about it. I don't tell people. What's the point? No one would believe me. Even now, writing this, I feel stupid, crazy. But I need to put it somewhere, because lately I've been waking up in places I don't remember going to again. Lately I've been losing hours again, and the marks, they've started spreading. Second story, The Mystery of Vicente Paredes, The Vanished Cemetery, 1975, Argentina. I swear if someone else told me this story, I'd think they were crazy. But it happened to me, and no matter how much I try to explain it, I can't make sense of it. It was a cold, rainy night in 1975, and I was the only one working the graveyard shift, literally. The cemetery wasn't big, just a quiet resting place for the town's dead, with its cracked mausoleums and rows of weather-worn tombstones. I was used to the silence, the occasional stray dog, and the way the wind made the trees groan like ghosts whispering secrets. But that night the silence was different, thicker, almost humming. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized it wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from behind the central mausoleum. A deep, vibrating sound, like something huge was hovering just out of sight. My stomach knotted, but curiosity pushed me forward. I stepped cautiously past the gravestones, my boots sinking into the wet earth. As I rounded the mausoleum, I saw it, a sphere floating in the air, pulsing with a sickly yellow glow. My breath caught in my throat. It was about the size of a small car, smooth and seamless, like no machine I'd ever seen. The rain didn't even seem to touch it. It just sizzled away before making contact. Then, before I could react, a blinding beam of light shot down from the sphere, hitting me square in the chest. I couldn't move. My arms, my legs, even my breath, it all just stopped. And then I felt it. A pulling sensation, like something was yanking me up by my bones. The ground disappeared beneath me. My stomach flipped as I was lifted into the air. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the cemetery shrinking below me, the gravestones warping like reflections on water. When I came to, I wasn't in the cemetery anymore. I was lying on something cold and metallic, my body stiff and aching. The air smelled sterile, like hospital disinfectant, but with an underlying hint of something off. Something that didn't belong on Earth. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't. Not at first. And then I saw them. Tall, thin figures with elongated limbs and pale greenish skin. Their faces were almost human, but stretched, unnatural. Their eyes were huge, black voids, and they were staring at me like I was some kind of specimen. I wanted to scream, but my throat wouldn't work. Then, without moving their mouths, I heard them speak. Or rather, I felt their voices in my head. We are correcting an error. The words rattled through my skull, cold and empty of any emotion. I had no idea what they meant. I didn't care. I just wanted out. I don't know if it was the fear or something they did to me, but I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. It was like my body didn't belong to me anymore. My breathing was shallow, my limbs useless, and my mind was screaming, but no sound left my lips. The room around me, if you could call it a room, was dim, bathed in an eerie bluish glow that didn't seem to come from any visible light source. The walls were metallic, but organic at the same time, shifting subtly, like they were breathing. The air was thick, charged with something that made my skin tingle, like static before a lightning strike. The beings moved around me with an unsettling grace, their elongated fingers hovering inches from my skin, as if they were analyzing me without actually touching me. I could feel their presence in my head, poking through my thoughts, shifting through my memories like they were flipping through the pages of a book. I wanted to fight, to resist, but I was powerless. We are correcting an error. They said it again, but this time something changed. A sharp pain shot through my skull, like 1,000 needles pressing into my brain. My vision blurred, darkened at the edges. I felt something slipping, like parts of me were being rewritten, erased, or replaced. My memories flickered, disjointed images flashing before my eyes, graves, the cemetery, my own hands digging into the earth. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence. Stillness. A sensation of displacement, like I was no longer in sync with the world I knew. And then, in a blink, I wasn't in that room anymore. I was somewhere else, outside, lying on damp grass, my body numb and trembling. The cold night air hit me like a slap, sharp and real. I gasped, filling my lungs with the heavy scent of wet earth and rotting leaves. My hands clawed at the ground, desperate for something tangible, something that proved I was back. But as I looked around, my stomach dropped. This wasn't the cemetery, not even close. I was in an open field, miles from where I had been, with no sign of tombstones, mausoleums, or the familiar iron gate. The sky above me was still dark, but something about it felt wrong. The stars looked out of place, as if the constellations had shifted slightly, unfamiliar patterns dotting the sky where familiar ones should be. My mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened, but everything was fractured, like a puzzle with missing pieces. I forced myself to my feet, my legs weak, my balance off, and I started walking. The town had to be somewhere nearby. I just had to get back. But a nagging dread clawed at my gut. Something told me that whatever I was going to find, it wouldn't be the same. It took me nearly an hour to find my way back. The town looked normal at first. Houses in their usual places, streetlights buzzing in the distance. But as I reached the cemetery gates, a wave of nausea hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. The cemetery wasn't right. The layout was off. The graves, the mausoleums, even the damn trees, they weren't where they were supposed to be. It was like someone had rearranged everything overnight, but not just randomly. Some graves were missing entirely, others were in places I swore they had never been before. My hands trembled as I reached for the gate, pushing it open with a creak that sent chills down my spine. And then I saw it. The graves I had dug just last week, the ones I knew were fresh, looked ancient. The headstones were worn, weathered by time, as if they had been there for decades. Some names were barely readable, the engravings smoothed down by years of erosion. My breath hitched. This wasn't just my imagination. This wasn't just fear messing with my head. The cemetery had changed. Time had passed for these graves, but not for me. I stood there frozen, my mind trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe I was confused. Maybe the rain had played tricks on me. Maybe I had hit my head and lost track of time. But no matter how much I tried to reason it away, the truth was staring me right in the face. Some of the graves I had buried just last week were old now. The grass over them was thick, undisturbed, as if no one had touched that soil in years. The dirt should have still been loose, unsettled, but it wasn't. I stumbled forward, my breathing ragged, and reached out to touch one of the tombstones. Cold, rough. A thin layer of moss clung to the surface, something that should have taken years to form. My stomach twisted. I turned, scanning the cemetery, and that's when I noticed something else. There were graves I didn't recognize at all. Tombstones I had never seen before. Names I didn't know. And then I saw my work. Shed, the little shack where I kept my tools, where I'd spent nearly every night for years. It was different. The paint was peeling, the wood looked warped and rotted, like it had been abandoned for a long, long time. My knees buckled. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just me misremembering. Something had changed. I forced myself to move, to check, to prove to myself that I wasn't going insane. My hands trembled as I reached for the door of the shed. It creaked open, revealing the dim interior. Everything inside was covered in dust. Thick, undisturbed dust. My tools, the shovel I had used just last night, were rusted, corroded. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of decay and time. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I stepped inside, my fingers trailing over the workbench. This wasn't right. I spun around, panic clawing at my throat, and ran back toward the graves. I had to find something familiar, something to anchor me. And then my eyes landed on one grave in particular, one that shouldn't have been there at all. The name carved into the stone made my blood run cold. Vicente Paredes. My name. My hands went numb. The inscription below my name blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. Born 1932, died 1975. My breath hitched. No, this was wrong. I was alive. I was standing right here. My pulse roared in my ears, my mind scrambling for explanations, but there was none. My grave was here. Time had moved forward, but I hadn't. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the uneven ground, my own grave. The earth over it looked old, settled, as if I had been buried for decades. My fingers dug into my arms, gripping tight, trying to feel myself, to remind myself that I was real, that I was here. But the world around me didn't agree. The cemetery had changed, and I wasn't supposed to be in it anymore. A deep, suffocating dread wrapped around me like a vice, the weight of the impossible pressing down on my chest. I turned and ran. I don't know why or where I thought I could go, but my body moved on instinct. I sprinted through the cemetery, past the rows of displaced tombstones, past mausoleums that shouldn't have been there, my breath ragged and sharp. And then, as I reached the gates, I heard it. That same deep hum, vibrating through the air like an electrical charge. I skidded to a stop, my body going cold. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I turned my head slowly, knowing what I would see, but praying I was wrong. Hovering just above the graves, glowing that same sickly yellow, was the sphere. It had never left, and neither had I. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The hum grew louder, vibrating in my bones, in my teeth, in the hollow space of my chest where my heart should have been. The sphere pulsed, shifting in place like it was watching me, like it had been waiting. A cold realization slithered into my brain. I was never supposed to leave. They had let me go, yes, but not back to the world I knew. Back to some twisted, altered version of it. My eyes darted to the tombstones again, to my own grave, and a nauseating thought crawled into my mind. Had I died? Had they brought me back wrong? The air thickened, pressing against my skin, my lungs struggling to pull in air that felt too dense, too foreign. The sphere flickered, and in that split second, shadows moved beneath it. Not human. Them. The beings. Thin skeletal figures shifting in and out of the darkness, their elongated heads tilting at impossible angles. Their presence felt like an itch at the back of my skull, an unbearable pressure like they were thinking too loudly, filling my mind with whispers I couldn't understand. My pulse slammed against my ribs. I had to get out. Now. I turned and bolted through the cemetery gates, my feet slipping on the rain-slick ground. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed distance. The night was darker now, unnaturally so, the streetlights barely flickering, their glow swallowed by the thick, heavy air. The town ahead looked the same at first glance, but as I ran, I started noticing things. The houses were too still, no movement behind the windows. No distant hum of radios or TVs. The streets were empty. Too empty. As if the whole town had just stopped. My own home wasn't far, just a few blocks away, and I clung to the thought of it like a lifeline. If I could just get there, maybe I could make sense of this. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop. The feeling of being watched was unbearable now, a suffocating weight pressing against my back. They were following. I could feel it. The hum never faded, only growing more insistent, more wrong. My house came into view, a small, modest place I had lived in for years. But as I reached the porch, something in my gut twisted so violently that I nearly doubled over. The front door was slightly open, and through the crack, I saw it. Movement. Inside, I should have turned away. I should have run. But I was too far gone, too desperate to believe that something familiar, something human, still existed. I stepped inside, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The air inside the house was thick, stale, like it had been sealed shut for years. My eyes darted around the living room. Everything was exactly where it should be. The old armchair in, the corner. The small wooden table with the crack running through the middle. The coat I had thrown over the back of the chair the night before. But something felt wrong. The air was too still. The house too quiet. And then I heard it. A sound from the bedroom. Slow, shuffling movements. I swallowed hard, my body screaming at me to get the hell out, but some part of me, the part still, clinging to logic, still hoping this was all some fucked up hallucination, pushed me forward. I reached the bedroom door. My fingers trembled as I pushed it open, and then I saw myself. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was standing in my own bedroom, staring at myself. The other me was sitting on the edge of my bed, hunched over, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together like he'd been waiting. His skin was pale, too pale, like something long dead but still walking around. His eyes, my eyes, snapped up to meet mine, and a cold, razor-sharp terror sliced through me. They were wrong. Too dark, too empty, like the black voids of the beings on the ship. My gut twisted, nausea rising fast, my body rejecting what it was seeing. This wasn't me. It looked like me, sure. Same face, same clothes I had been wearing that night. Even the same small scar on my left hand from when I cut myself fixing a fence last summer. But this thing wasn't human. It wasn't alive. It was watching me, studying me, like it was waiting to see what I'd do next. My legs, locked up, every nerve in my body screaming run, but I couldn't, not until it spoke, not until it opened its mouth, and in my own voice, but warped, stretched, like a recording playing at the wrong speed, it said, "You're not supposed to be here." The sound of my own voice coming from something that wasn't me shattered whatever frozen state I had been in. My body finally listened. I turned and ran. I don't even remember making it down the hallway. One moment I was in the bedroom, and the next I was outside, stumbling down the porch steps, my vision swimming, my stomach twisting into knots. The street was still empty. The sky was still wrong. The stars didn't look real. They looked like something pretending to be a sky, a bad copy of the real thing. My lungs burned as I ran, my mind racing in 1,000 directions, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was I dreaming? Had I died and come back wrong? Had they replaced me? The hum was still there, vibrating through the ground, through my teeth. I wasn't alone. They were still here, watching, fixing their mistake, and then, just like before, the light came. A flash so bright it swallowed everything. I don't remember what happened after that. 1 second I was running, the next I was waking up, back in the cemetery. The air was cold, the rain had stopped and everything was quiet. Too quiet. The layout of the graves was back to normal. The mausoleum was where it should be. Even the shed looked exactly as I remembered it, like none of it had ever changed. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled to my feet, my body aching like I had been dropped from a great height. I staggered toward the nearest tombstone, fingers trembling as I touched the stone. No moss, no wear. Fresh, just as it should be. My grave was gone. My name wasn't there. It was like none of it had ever happened. But it did. I know it did. I could still feel it. The heaviness in my bones. The hollow ache in my skull, like something had been taken from me. Or maybe put back. I never spoke about that night. Not to anyone. I still live in this town, still work at the cemetery, and every now and then when I'm alone at night, I hear it. The hum, distant, just at the edge of my hearing, like something waiting, watching. The sky never quite looks the same to me anymore. The stars feel off, no matter how much I try to convince myself they're in the right place. And sometimes, when I pass by a mirror, I catch my reflection lingering for just a fraction of a second too long. Like it's studying me, making sure I still belong, making sure I don't remember too much. But I do. I remember everything. And I know deep down that they weren't just correcting a mistake that night. They were making sure I stayed buried.
If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more spine-chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is pinned in the first comment, and even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey.
Third story, The Shadow on the Grave, the Henry Lowell case, 2003, Texas, USA. I don't know why I'm even writing this. Maybe because I need someone, anyone, to believe me. Maybe because keeping it bottled up is worse than reliving it. But I swear on everything I have that what I'm about to tell you is real. It happened. And no matter how much I try to explain it away, the scars on my body and the gaps in my memory won't let me forget. I've been a grave digger in this tiny Texas town for over 20 years. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. That night, early October 2003, was supposed to be just another shift. Some poor old soul needed burying, and it was my job to get it done before sunrise. The air was thick, heavy, the way it gets before a storm, but the sky was clear. Too clear. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No wind, no crickets, no distant howl of coyotes. Just me, my shovel, and the low hum of a truck engine from the highway a few miles away. Then, out of nowhere, I felt it, like someone was watching me. The kind of feeling that makes the hair on your arms stand up. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and turned. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't human. No way in hell. The thing was standing, no, floating, beside a headstone maybe 15 feet away. It was tall, painfully thin, with this sickly, smooth, almost wet-looking skin. Its body caught the moonlight in a way that made it seem like it was glowing, but not really. More like it was reflecting something I couldn't see. But the worst part, its eyes. Pure white, no pupils, no irises. Just two empty lights burning into me like headlights in the dark. I wanted to run. My legs wouldn't move. It was like something was holding me in place, like the air had turned to cement around me. Then it reached out. Its arm was too long, stretching unnaturally in my direction. Its fingers, if you could call them that, thin and bony. The second it got close, my vision blurred. My ears rang so loud I thought my head would explode. And then, nothing. Black. Empty. I woke up in complete darkness. Not the kind of darkness you get in a room with no windows, but something deeper, heavier, like the space itself had been drained of light. My body felt weightless, like I was floating, but at the same time, something was wrapped around me. A thick, gelatinous film clung to my skin, cold and wet, like I'd been pulled out of a vat of raw meat. I tried to move, but my arms felt sluggish, like they weren't fully mine anymore. That's when I heard it. Not a voice, not really. More like a thought, loud, invasive, forcing itself into my skull. We are gathering biological data. No accent, no tone, just words, hollow and mechanical, playing directly in my mind like a broken radio signal. I tried to scream, to thrash, but my body refused. I could only stare into the abyss around me, my breath echoing in the thick, humid air. Then the pain started. It was unlike any pain I had ever felt before, not sharp like a knife or dull like a bruise, but something deeper, something that pulsed through my nerves like electricity being forced into my body. It started in my abdomen, a burning, twisting sensation, like my insides were being rearranged, but I couldn't move. Couldn't even flinch. My breath hitched as I felt something press against my stomach from the inside, like a hand trying to push its way out of me. I wanted to vomit, to claw at my own flesh, to do anything to stop whatever was happening. But all I could do was lie there in that thick, suffocating gel. My body completely useless. The darkness around me shifted, and for the first time I realized I wasn't alone. There were shapes, tall, thin, moving with an unnatural smoothness, like puppets on invisible strings. I couldn't see their faces, only the faint glimmers of white where their eyes should have been, flickering like dying stars. One of them moved closer, its presence pressing against my mind like a vice, and that same hollow voice echoed in my skull again. The specimen is responsive. The process will continue. My body jerked violently, my limbs locking up as another wave of pain surged through me. I wanted to scream, but my throat was paralyzed. My thoughts felt scrambled, slipping through my fingers like sand. Then, as suddenly as it started, the pain stopped. My body slumped, my muscles shaking from whatever they had just done to me. I could finally move, but barely. I felt like I had been drained of all my strength. The gel clinging to my skin began to thin, sliding off me like melting wax. My breath was ragged, uneven, and I realized with a sickening dread that I could feel something moving under my skin, tiny, rapid pulses, like insects burrowing just beneath the surface. My stomach lurched, but there was nothing to throw up. My body felt foreign, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I looked around, my vision finally adjusting to the dark, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Rows and rows of bodies, suspended just like me, wrapped in the same slimy cocoon. Some were human, others weren't. Some were shriveled, their skin stretched tight over skeletal frames, their mouths frozen in silent screams. Others had smooth, featureless faces, their forms twisted and elongated in ways that defied logic. The air smelled wrong, stale, metallic, tinged with something rotten. My pulse pounded in my ears as the realization hit me. I was nothing more than another specimen, another piece of biological data for them to collect, to examine, to break apart. And then, before I could even process what was happening, the world around me dissolved. I gasped as I hit the ground, the cold, damp soil of the cemetery rushing up to meet me. My body convulsed, my lungs burning as I sucked in the night air like a drowning man breaking the surface. I scrambled to my hands and knees, the taste of copper thick in my mouth, my skin still slick with that disgusting gel. My head spun violently, my vision blurring as I tried to make sense of where I was. The grave I had been digging was still there, the shovel half buried in the dirt. The headstone, the same one I had seen that thing standing beside, looked undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. But my body told a different story. My stomach ached, a deep bruising pain radiating from my core. I lifted my shirt with trembling fingers, and what I saw nearly made my heart stop. Geometric patterns, thin and precise, were etched into my skin, glowing faintly in the darkness before fading, leaving behind nothing but raw pink flesh. I touched them expecting pain, but there was none. Just the lingering, sickening knowledge that something had been inside me, had done something to me, and now I was back like it had never happened. But the worst part, my watch. The hands were frozen at 3:47 a.m. 3 hours had passed. 3 hours of my life gone, stolen, and I had no idea what else they had taken from me. I just sat there in the dirt, my body shaking so hard I thought I might collapse again. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the last thing I remembered before everything went dark. But it was like my own thoughts were fighting against me, slipping away the moment I tried to focus. The pain in my stomach had dulled, but there was something else now. This awful, creeping sensation just under my skin, like my body didn't belong to me anymore. I kept running my hands over my abdomen, over those strange marks that had faded almost as quickly as they appeared, half expecting to feel something moving underneath. But nothing. Just that lingering sense of wrongness, like my organs had been rearranged. I forced myself to my feet, every muscle in my body screaming in protest, and staggered toward my truck. It was still there, parked just outside the cemetery gates, but something was off. The windows were fogged up, the metal coated in a thin layer of moisture like it had been sitting in a storm, except the ground around it was bone dry. My hands trembled as I fumbled with my keys, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I just needed to get the hell out of there. I needed to put as much distance between myself and whatever the hell had happened to me as possible. But as soon as I turned the key in the ignition, the radio crackled to life, by itself. At first it was just static, this low, garbled hum that sent a chill down my spine. I reached for the dial, ready to shut it off, but then I heard it, this deep, rhythmic clicking, like something tapping against glass. It wasn't a station. It wasn't even a voice. It was something else. My entire body went rigid. The clicking grew louder, faster, like it was responding to me. I could feel it in my teeth, this weird vibration crawling up my spine. And then, just for a second, Buried deep beneath the static, I swore I heard words, not in English, not in any language I knew, but I understood them. Observation complete, awaiting further directive. My stomach turned to ice. I slammed my hand against the radio, cutting off the sound, my pulse hammering so hard I thought my ribs might crack. I didn't think. I just threw the truck into gear and floored it, the tires kicking up gravel as I sped out of that graveyard like the devil himself was behind me. I didn't stop. Not for the red lights, not for the empty road stretching out in front of me. My hands were locked on the wheel, my knuckles bone white, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. I just needed to get home. I needed to wake up from whatever nightmare this was. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a dream. This was real, and whatever had taken me, it wasn't done with me. When I finally made it home, I barely remember stumbling through the front door. My legs felt like they might give out at any second. The house was dark, silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I locked the door behind me, bolted it, even shoved a chair under the handle like that would somehow keep them out. My head was pounding, my whole body covered in a cold sweat. I dragged myself to the bathroom, flipped on the light, and that's when I really saw myself for the first time. My skin was pale, almost gray, like I had been drained of blood. My eyes were sunken, the veins around them dark, bruised. I looked like I had been dead for 3 days. My hands shook as I lifted my shirt again, and even though the markings had faded, I could still feel them, like a phantom pain etched into my flesh. Then I noticed something else, something that made my blood freeze. My nails. They were longer than they had been that night, noticeably longer. I ran my fingers over them, my breathing shallow. It wasn't possible. I had clipped them that morning. There was no way in hell they could have grown that much in a few hours. Except, what if it hadn't been hours? What if it had been longer? What if whatever they did to me had changed something inside me? I gripped the edges of the sink, staring at my reflection, my mind racing. And that's when I saw it. Not in the mirror, not in the room, but in my own eyes. Something watching me. I don't know how long I stood there staring into my own eyes, but it felt like forever. There was something off about them, something that wasn't there before. The color looked the same, but deeper, almost too sharp, like the edges of my irises had been refined under a microscope. And then, just for a second, I saw movement, not a reflection, not my own pupils adjusting to the light. Something shifted inside them, just beneath the surface like a shadow swimming in ink. My stomach twisted, that same sick feeling creeping up my spine, and I staggered back from the mirror, nearly tripping over my own feet. I wanted to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen it, but I couldn't, because now I knew. Whatever happened to me that night, whatever they did to me, I didn't come back the same. I felt it in my bones, in my blood, in the way my own body no longer felt familiar. My heartbeat was too slow, my breathing too measured. Even my thoughts felt different, like there was an echo, a presence, just at the edge of my mind that wasn't there before. And the worst part, the longer I stood there, the more I realized I wasn't scared. I should have been terrified, but instead I just felt calm, like something was whispering to me, lulling me into acceptance. That's when I knew for sure they hadn't just taken me, they had left something behind. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was being pulled somewhere else, floating, weightless, lost in a vast, endless dark. It wasn't dreaming. It was more like remembering. Flickers of something I couldn't fully grasp, images too vast and incomprehensible for my mind to hold on to. I saw stars, but not like the ones in our sky. These were bigger, older, their light stretching across distances I couldn't comprehend. I saw structures, massive, spiraling things that defied logic, twisting and unfolding in ways that shouldn't have been possible. And then I saw them. The same beings from the graveyard, standing in perfect, motionless silence, their white eyes fixed on something beyond my understanding. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, my chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven bursts, but the second I was fully awake, the images were gone, slipping from my mind like water through cracked fingers. I sat there, my hands gripping the sheets, my pulse hammering in my ears. And then I noticed it, my clock. The digital numbers blinked, frozen at 3:47 a.m. The same time as before, the exact same time. My breath hitched and my whole body went cold. They had been here. Maybe not physically, but they had been here. Watching. Waiting. I stopped going to work after that. I couldn't. I could barely even step outside without feeling like I was being monitored, like 100 invisible eyes were tracking my every move. My phone rang constantly. My boss, co-workers, even a few friends, all wondering what the hell had happened to me. I didn't answer. What was I supposed to say? That I had been taken, that I had been changed. No one would believe me. Hell, I barely believed it myself. But every time I looked in the mirror, every time I caught the way the light reflected just a little too sharply in my eyes, I knew the truth. I tried to ignore it, tried to pretend I could go back to normal, but my body wouldn't let me. Food tasted wrong, too bland, too artificial, like I wasn't meant to eat it anymore. My sense of time was off, hours slipping by in what felt like minutes. But the worst part was the silence. The quiet that settled in my house, pressing against my skull, thick and suffocating. No birds, no wind, no distant hum of passing cars, just an oppressive stillness stretching into eternity. And in that silence I swear I could hear something. Not a sound exactly, more like a presence, humming just beneath my skin, waiting for something. I didn't know what. I still don't. But I could feel it. Growing. Changing. And deep down I knew it was only a matter of time before they came back. Days blurred together after that. Or maybe it was weeks. I don't even know anymore. Time stopped making sense. Slipping through my fingers like sand, impossible to hold on to. I'd wake up at odd hours, staring at the ceiling, unable to move, my body locked in some kind of paralysis while my mind screamed for control. And always, always, that damn time on the clock. 3:47 a.m. No matter when I went to sleep, no matter how many times I checked, I'd wake up at that exact moment, my body drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I tried staying awake, forcing myself to sit in my chair with every light in the house on, but it didn't matter. The second I let my guard down, even for a blink, I'd be out. And when I woke up, something would be different. A new mark on my skin. A fresh, pulsing pain in my skull. The worst was the night I found the dirt. It was under my fingernails, packed deep into the crevices of my skin, staining my hands like I'd been digging all night. My heart dropped as I turned them over, the sick realization sinking in like a stone in my gut. I hadn't left the house. I knew I hadn't. But my hands told a different story. Trembling, I stood up, my legs weak beneath me, and that's when I saw the footprints, faint, almost undetectable, leading from my bedroom door to the front of the house. My own. I followed them, my breath shallow, every step feeling like I was walking towards something I didn't want to see. The door was still locked, the chair still wedged under the handle. But the dirt didn't lie. My stomach churned as I pulled the chair away, unlocking the door with shaking hands. It swung open, the cool night air rushing against my skin, and my knees nearly buckled. Because there in my driveway, parked at the exact same angle I'd left it, was my truck, and its tires, caked in fresh, damp cemetery soil. I don't remember leaving, I don't remember driving. But I knew I had been there, back at the graveyard, back where it all started. My hands twitched as I reached for the truck door, my fingers brushing against the cold metal, and the second I touched it, a violent, gut-wrenching flash ripped through my skull. Images, sounds, them. I stumbled back, my breath hitching, my vision blurring with white-hot pain. I saw myself standing in the cemetery, staring at the sky, my body stiff, unnatural, like a puppet on invisible strings. I wasn't alone. They were there, watching, waiting. And then, nothing. A void. A break in time itself. My mind fought to grasp it, to hold on to whatever was lurking just beyond my reach. But it slipped away, leaving me breathless, nauseous. I gripped the truck, steadying myself, and that's when I saw it, scratched into the hood, deep and jagged, like something had carved it with a blade made of fire, a symbol, geometric, the same ones that had been burned into my skin. My pulse pounded in my ears, a steady, deafening thump that drowned out everything else. I couldn't stay here, I couldn't be in that house, in that truck, in my own skin, because the truth was settling in now, pressing down on me with a weight so unbearable I could hardly breathe. They weren't just visiting, they weren't just watching, they were preparing. I left that night, drove for hours, no destination, no plan, just the road, stretching endlessly before me, the yellow lines blurring as my mind spiraled into a fog of exhaustion and fear. I didn't care where I ended up, as long as it was away. But no matter how far I went, no matter how many miles I put between myself and that graveyard, that house, them, it didn't matter. Because deep down I knew I wasn't running from something outside. I was running from what they had put inside me. The hum in my head was louder now, a constant droning presence that never faded, never stopped. I could feel it in my bones, in my blood, in every breath I took, like something had rewritten me. I was different now, not fully, not completely, but enough. Enough that I could sense them before they came, enough that I could hear the faint whispers in the static of my radio, see the strange symbols flashing in my mind when I closed my eyes. They had changed me, and whatever was happening, it wasn't over. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because I need someone to hear it. Maybe because I need proof. Something, anything, that I existed before this. Before them. I don't sleep anymore. I can't. Every time I do, I wake up somewhere else. A motel. A gas station parking lot. Once, in the middle of the goddamn desert. Miles from anything. My truck always finds me. I don't remember driving. I don't remember leaving, but I know what it means. They're still watching, still testing. And one day, when they decide I'm ready, they're going to take me again. If you're reading this, if you ever wake up with missing time, with marks you don't remember getting, with that awful, sick feeling that something isn't right inside you, you need to understand. This isn't a one-time thing. This isn't some isolated event. They don't take you and let you go. They change you, piece by piece, until you're not even sure what's left of you is still human. I don't know how much longer I have. Not before they come back. Before I go back. Maybe I already have, and I just don't remember. Maybe I never even made it back that night in the cemetery. Maybe all of this, everything I think I've lived since then, is just part of the process. I hear them now. The hum, the clicking, the sound of something vast and ancient pressing against the edges of my mind. They're close. I don't know if I'll be able to write again. Maybe this post will be the only thing left of me when they're done. But if you're reading this, if you've felt it too, then you already know. We don't come back the same. We don't come back alone.
So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you have had a similar experience or have suggestions for future horror stories, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.